Hello, welcome back to another episode of the Parenting and Pregnancy Podcast, where I sit down with parents, experts, and other relevant individuals discussing all things related to pregnancy, childbirth, parenting, and beyond. So if that sounds like something that you're interested in, consider subscribing so you don't miss any new episodes. This week, I'm talking with Crystal Pawlus, a certified baby-wearing educator through the Center of Baby-Wearing Education. I sat down and had a really great conversation with her. Actually, it was such a great conversation that we ended up talking for well over an hour, and I actually broke it into two parts. So we're going to have part one today. In part one, we're going to be discussing types of baby carriers, how to use those carriers, and criteria for choosing a good carrier. Additionally, Crystal discusses a little bit about how to choose the right carrier for you, and we discuss a little bit of safe baby wearing as well. But without further ado, let's get into it. So I'm here with Crystal. She's a baby wearing educator, and she's going to tell us some of the ins and outs of baby wearing. So Crystal, why don't you start by just telling us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
So I am a mom of three, and so that's actually where I got into baby wearing 7 years ago, and I love helping people figure things out because baby wearing can be a little interesting and difficult at when you're first getting started, and so I did a lot of volunteering and helping people, but then I became a certified baby wearing educator through Center of Baby Wearing Studies. They have an excellent program, and so now what I do is I like to help people find the perfect carrier for them if they are expecting, help them figure out what kind of carrier would work for them. And my biggest thing is trying to push people to think about baby wearing before they have their baby, because if you practice before, it makes it so much easier than when you have a baby it, who is upset or, like crying, and you're trying to figure things out with your carrier. And so if you practice before, if you learn everything that you need to before, then you can practice. And then also babies change. Your baby wearing experience is not going to always be this cute, cuddly little guy. They grow and they change so quickly. And what babies do on the floor, like so when they're trying to push away or roll, they're doing on you. They carry the person who's carrying them, and you are the gym. So how a lot of times people are like, oh, the baby hates it. They're trying to push away. Oh, they're trying to look around. I think they want to do forward facing. But they're not quite there when they can hold themselves up appropriately. So just educating people on safe ways to wear a baby, to make sure you are comfortable so that you can take care of yourself as the caregiver and also take care of your baby and support them hip healthy and meet their needs. That's kind of what I do.
Well, that is really cool. I know when I was first introduced to baby wearing, um, it was just one carrier, and I thought, oh, this is cool. And then just kind of as I learned more about different carriers, it was kind of cool to see different purposes, but there really is a lot, and there's a learning curve with some of them that you don't
Sure.
necessarily think about. You think you just buy the product, um, and it's going to work well and it's going to be easy, and someone else liked it and someone else used it, so I'm going to be able to figure it out. And so I love that there's resources out there for parents to have some assistance with that. And I love the idea about learning this prenatally, because like you said, when you have a crying baby and you're wanting to get them all snuggled up in the carrier, that's not really the best time to learn how to use one. You're probably not going to be as successful as learning prenatally. And I think it'd be fun even to get partners involved in
Yes.
in trying them out and everything. And okay, so I know there's different types of carriers. Why don't you kind of explain some of the different types of carriers out there? Maybe pros and cons, or what you like about them, what other parents like about them, um, for parents who are kind of wanting to learn more.
So I'll kind of go through, like, Riesling is one that I really like. It's a piece of cloth that on one end has two rings, and you kind of thread them through, kind of like I don't know if uh some people might not remember this, but I know as a kid I had those belts where you like loop it through one way and then you go over one and under the other. So it's kind of the same idea. Ring slings do have a little bit of a learning curve. You don't want to be like yanking on the whole um tail. You want to take each little bit of the ring sling to tighten it. And you also want to make sure that baby is close enough to kiss, where you can easily move to touch baby's head if they're like, especially if you're have breast tissue, you want baby to be sitting above that, just for safety reasons. But ring slings are great for once you are comfortable in the range lane and comfortable with baby or with breastfeeding, it's really easy to um, put the two together. So you can easily lower down with the range lane to nurse and then bringing back up when you're done. I really also I like range lanes when you have a toddler who is doing the ups and downs. So it's really easy to hold on your hip and then you have a little more support because it takes a lot more energy to hold baby in arms versus using the carrier. And when you have a carrier on correctly, you are distributing the weight of the baby across your entire torso, your back and stuff, as opposed to just holding in your arms. um, so that's the rinsing. I really like those. And yeah, so the next time type I'll talk about is kind of like a simple piece of cloth. There's kind of two different styles of this simple piece of cloth. There's a stretchy wrap. A lot of people think of those. Those are like your Mobies, your Solies, your Bobas. They have a bit of stretch to them. One thing with those, you want to put them on as like tight as like a tight t-shirt, so that when baby gets on is on wearing or when baby is being worn, they're nice and tight, and not too loose or anything. Those ones are a little more difficult to tighten once baby is in, so making sure that you pre-tie. And you also, for comfort for baby and for you, making sure that you put baby in, like there's a pass that goes kind of like across your shoulder, crosses in on your torso in the front. You want to make sure that baby is in the center of each of those passes, not just kind of like hanging out on one side. That will help distribute that weight a lot better too. The other kind of simple piece of cloth is a woven one. It doesn't have the stretch, and this one is very, very versatile. There's millions of ways to wear them, front, side, back, and you can really take your time and tighten those with baby in them. There's ways that you can pre-tie, or tie baby on you, or even if baby is asleep in arms, there's ways that you can tie baby, like put wrapping the wrap around you and baby without putting baby down, which is always a great way, because I know most caregivers at one point, you're at a point where you're like, I have a sleeping baby, and for whatever reason you don't want to put them down. And so yeah, so that's another great one. The woven wrap can be in different lengths too. Lots of uh different kinds of material. There's hand woven, there's like it's kind of like a big rabbit hole that you can jump down through. Anything you want to know in particularly about either of those?
Yeah, so maybe tell our listeners, you said there's a lot of different ways to tie a woven wrap. Um,
Yeah.
so do you tie stretchy wraps and woven wraps the same way, since they're the same, they look the same, or are they used differently?
Yeah, so there is a way that you can wrap a woven wrap that is very similar to the stretchy wrap. A stretchy wrap, usually, like different manufacturers might have different expectations, but you really want to have three passes across baby to hold baby in place. So if you think about it, you have um baby in one cross that goes across one shoulder, the other cross goes across the other shoulder, and then you have what I like to call a cummerbund, for lack of a better word, is the piece that goes directly around both of you. So then you have three. Um, with the woven wrap, you can wear uh, them in that same way, but you don't always have to have the three passes. You can have just like a single pass, which is great. So if you have a shorter wrap, a lot of times people get overwhelmed by the length and they're kind of like, what do I do with all this length? And sometimes it's kind of dragging on the ground, and people don't want to, if you're out in a muddy spot, that might not be something that you want to do. So so yeah, so those are two different kinds. There's a couple more. Do you want me to keep talking about the different kinds of carriers?
Yeah, so we went over the ring sling, woven wrapped, and stretchy wraps.
Yep,
And those are kind of more of our cloth carriers. But what other
yep.
options do we have out there?
I'll talk about the Asian style carriers, usually called Mei Dai or Mei Tai. Those are, and there's some variations too, but it's usually just a rectangle piece of cloth, and off of it has four straps. Usually the shorter straps go around your waist. And then baby, you put it on kind of like an apron, so it falls down, and then you put baby in and you scoop baby up um, into the carrier, if that makes sense. And then you tie frosting on your back. You can also wear this on your side, or wear baby on your back in this carrier. I love these. They've there's kind of been a trend. They were super popular back when I first had my son, and then they kind of like waned down, and it is kind of hard to find them. But there's a new kind of emergence of them, and I'm so happy about this because they're so easy. They're very intuitive. There's not as big of a learning curve, which I think is really great. And going from carrier, like if you have multiple people, like say a husband and wife, usually we're shaped differently. So they're really easy to go from one to the other without really any adjustments. The simple piece of cloth is another one that can easily go between people, but like a ring sling, you will have to like adjust it to fit you. And then the next carrier that we'll talk about, a buckle carrier, that's another one that is not super interchangeable between caregivers without doing a slight little adjustments.
Okay, so it sounds like it's kind of a cross between like a buckle carrier and then maybe one of those other types that we talked about.
Yeah, so actually, this is where the buckle carriers came from. Like the Asian style carriers have been used for a long time, mostly in Asia. And then people were like, oh, I want to create something that's more kind of like a cross between that and a backpack. So that's when you have kind of your buckle carriers. Buckle carriers are great. They can be like quick up and down. So if you are like kind of in a pinch and just need to get baby up, you can get baby up really easily. Like personally, like right now with my toddler, when I'm making dinner and prepping food, I will have that carrier on, like already strapped onto my back. And then if she needs to get up, I can easily throw her up onto my back, continue prepping food, and then when she's done in about like 5 or 10 minutes, I can easily get her down. Um, they the buckle carriers have a lot more kind of like one shop fits all kind of thing. So which is great because before you needed to like an infant, a newborn is way different than a toddler. So a lot of them are have adjustability where baby grows without needing a insert, which I love, but there is, you do make some compromises with that. Another thing is it's kind of like jeans. You know how one brand might fit you really well, but for me, a different brand, just like that same brand, just doesn't fit well. So you have that with the buckle carriers. The biggest thing is the webbing that goes around your shoulders, or your arm straps. Sometimes baby can fit easily on the front, but when you go to do a back carry, if you're like really petite, you can be like, oh, I can't get this tight enough where it's baby's comfortable enough where I can stand up straight and not having to lean forward. So if you are buying a carrier, and you want it to be that one-stop shop, I would definitely try to try on the front and the back to see the difference, especially if you're more of a petite person. I know I am, and I've had some issues with the back carries with different carriers.
Okay. So it's kind of some of the things to take into consideration then is maybe your size,
Hmm.
and but it sounds like pretty versatile when it comes to the length of time that you use it, which is kind of an exciting thing because I know with some, like
Yeah,
the stretchy wrap, it's a great wrap. It's one of my favorites in the first couple of months, but they get too big for them pretty quickly.
yeah.
Not as much the
Most of the
woven wraps, but I love. That's one thing I love about the buckle carriers is the amount of time you can use them.
Yeah. So the stretchy wraps, they usually are a little less expensive, which is great. But like you said, usually I would say like 20, 25 pounds. It like a lot of times manufacturers say it's like 30, possibly 40 pounds, but that would be, I think, a little uncomfortable. I know people who have done it and really enjoyed it and like praise them. I personally just couldn't find those to be super comfortable. But yeah, like the uh usually you can go up until about toddler with the buckle carriers. And then usually you do need to, if you want to continue wearing, they do have like toddler carries, they have preschool carries, which just so be or your older child, kid can still have that support and for you to be comfortable too.
Okay, so we've kind of gone through all the different, or a lot of the different styles out there and everything. Which would you say is your favorite for like a newborn?
Oh, that's such a loaded question. Honestly, I can't, honestly can't answer that. Pretty much for a newborn, I would say anything but a buckle carrier personally, just because you can really meet baby's needs. A newborn in a buckle carrier, I feel like you can do it. It just isn't as comfortable and such. And a lot of times with the buckle carriers, especially if you are a mom, trying to heal after birth and stuff, or if you had a cesarean or anything, those buckle carriers are not as comfortable sitting down. And if you had a cesarean, it can put a little extra weight on your tummy that can be uncomfortable with. But really, any of the other carriers, they're really adjustable to meet a newborn's needs. It really depends on each family. So that's one of the reasons why I think a baby wearing consultant is fantastic because one of the things we talk about is like, what is um, your priorities? Because different people have different priorities. Is it something that they just want to put on and wear for a long time and then put baby in and out? Do they want it to be adjustable from one caregiver to another? Um,
So
yeah,
kind of
and
you can
like,
help them pick a carrier based on their needs and goals of baby wearing. Is that what I'm
yes,
hearing?
yeah, for
Oh, okay.
sure. Yeah, and so usually what if someone's completely new to it, I kind of do a demo and show them each of the different styles real quickly. And a lot of times people can be like, oh, I thought I was gonna like that, but looking and watching you do that is kind of like, I don't know if that's gonna be my style or so yeah, it's interesting. And then t yeah, a lot of times people really want the buckles. So usually people do like a ball carrier and one other type of carrier, like a ring sling, a stretchy wrap, or a woven. Usually stretchy wrap or ring sling.
Okay, so how do we go about choosing a baby carrier that's going to meet our needs?
Yeah, um so I know everybody is always like, what's the one carrier that's the best carrier? And I have three criteria because I honestly, there's not one that's just like for sure this one. So the carrier needs to be allow baby's back to be supported in its natural position. When babies are first born, their spines are a little more curved, and as they grow up over the first year, they started to straighten more. So baby needs to be able to be nice and supported in that position. So either support them with that curved back, or as they are starting to grow up and get stronger muscles and straighten out their spine a little bit more, you have that nice supported back. And so you don't, and that also makes sure that babies are airways are protected too. If baby is kind of slumping in the carrier, which can sometimes happen with the stretchy wraps, if you don't put them on tight enough, babies can kind of slump. Then you worry about their airway because you don't want chin to chest. But if you have that nice supported back, then that's great. The second thing is the carrier, it allows for relaxed baby's legs to be relaxed in that spread squat position. So you want baby's knees to be supported from knee to knee and their butt to be nice and supported. And the spread squat position should be kind of like an M shape. So the bottom of baby's butt should be lower than their knees. And so if you kind of follow from their foot up to their knee, that's one of the ends of the M, and then going down, that's the middle of the M to their bottom, and then up, if that makes sense. So, and a lot of times people will be like, "Oh, I'm going to use this carrier that's a little bit bigger for my baby," um, and they'll be okay. But you really want them to be able to uh, easily bend their legs um, from knee to knee. So if baby's legs are out straight and they're not able to do that nice bend, then you need to either find a different carrier or adjust the carrier to fit baby's needs. And
Okay.
then the third thing is the carrier allows the wearer to distribute baby's weight comfortably across their own back. And at the same time that they can have stand up straight. So they're not like either hunching forward if baby's on their back or kind of trying to lean back to counter balance baby's weight on front. The wearer needs to be in a nice, comfortable position. Um, so yeah, and if you make sure that everything's tight enough, you're not going to be pulling on your shoulders or putting a lot of weight on your back. That's why it's like sometimes it's just a couple of little tweaks, like maybe raising up the waistband or something like that, and then tightening that can make a big difference in the wearer and baby's comfort.
Okay, and so maybe that's one of the reason, it seems like people love baby wearing or they're not a big fan. And I know when I've talked to clients, um, I think a big part of why some people won't like baby wearing is because they never learned how to do it in a way that, like you said, distributes the weight and is comfortable for both the parent and the child, or
Yeah.
the caregiver and the child. Um, so I love that you pointed that out because that can take a little bit of fandangling. Um, and so I think that's where you come in,
Yeah.
or someone in your position, um, because not only can you bring a ton of different carriers and styles for parents to try, which is much cheaper than buying 4 carriers and finding out you only like one of them, or thinking
Yeah.
you're going to love a carrier and not. So I love that. But then getting to have that direct instruction instead of like trying to problem solve on the internet or just messing around with it and then just kind of giving up. And baby wearing carriers are not necessarily cheap, and some are cheaper than others, but it's kind
Yep.
of an investment. So it's I was so happy to discover this resource for people. Um, and then so we've kind of touched on this in a lot of different places, but you've been mentioning the looking for the carriers that you can have the M-shaped legs and baby being close enough to kiss, and things like that. But I'd love to kind of just address as a whole safe baby wearing, because there's ways to do it safely and then there's ways that are not as safe.
Yep.
So can you tell us a little bit about those things, and then maybe go into why we're looking for that M shape, or why we want baby close enough to kiss?
Yeah. So we'll start with close enough to kiss, and that's easily, like raising and lowering your head to kiss baby's top of their head. If you're needing to strain a little bit, then just lift baby up a little bit more. It should be a nice fluid motion. Um, but when you're close enough to kiss, it's really easy to monitor baby's airway. Remember, babies are born, and they are still gestating even after they're born. So we this isn't just a baby wearing thing, this is a baby thing. Babies need to have open airways and breathing. So if you have them on your chest, you can easily monitor them. You can make sure that their chin is not touching their chest, because that can close up their airway here. And babies are obligatory nose breathers. So if they are more in that sniffing position, that is perfect, where their head is kind of tilted back. And you also don't want baby's head to be like twisted too much to one side or the other. If you have like a straw and you kind of imagine like twisting it one way to the other, that can also close off their airway. So that's why you want it close enough to kiss. Tight, tight and in sight. So close enough to kiss and tight and in sight. So tight enough where the baby's back is nice and supported, so they're not doing that slumping. And especially if they're on like a female who has breast tissue, you want to make sure that they're above that breast tissue. If you do lower them to breastfeed when they are done breastfeeding, and that means like actually having nutritive sucking, then removing them from the breast and bringing them back up tight and close. I'm all for non-nutritive sucking, but not in a carrier. Uh,
Okay. So for
so,
breastfeeding in a carrier, it should
mhm.
just be for them to get full, not just for comfort.
Yep, yep.
Okay.
And just just because if you look at the research out there, there's not a lot of instances of things going wrong, but when you do add in breastfeeding, and if a baby is sick, I those two things can really just are two things that kind of swing you to the other direction. So like if your baby is sick and stuff, I would just focus on breastfeeding on its own, and just baby wearing on their own.
Okay. And I'd say
And
that
then
same thing for people who are new to either breastfeeding or baby wearing. Kind of good thing to
yeah,
master each one on their own and then try and combine them, because if you try and master them both at the same time, there's probably going to be a lot of struggles. So I liked that you
yes,
pointed that out. Yeah, definitely two
yeah,
skills to master on their own before combining them.
yeah. They both have a learning curve, so
Yeah.
make it easier on all of you. And then insight. So another thing that I recommend is not covering baby's face. So sometimes, a lot of times, like with the buckle carriers, people will use the hoods to cover baby's face, and to keep the sun off of their eyes, or or if they fall asleep, but it's hard for you to monitor. The hoods are actually meant for if you have a child on your back and they fall asleep, and when they do that, their head's kind of like hang backwards, so it's to help support their neck that way. Um, so if you do need to use like cover up their head a little bit, I like to do like, like do one side. So then you can easily look down and see baby's face. And so then airway, breathing, circulation, everything's looking good. You don't want to be doing that like big reveal of like, and I think this is just in general. I think babies really you should be easily able to see them. So in strollers, or a car seat, same kind of thing. Not putting a blanket over them, especially to keep the sun off of them. They can get too hot for one, and then they don't have enough oxygen and stuff. That was kind of a side note there.
No, but that's a great point, and I think it does tie into the baby wearing because it's something that I see out and about a lot. Is those infant carriers they seem so great and so convenient that you can just pull the baby out of the car seat and you can put them and you can take them anywhere. You can put them in the stroller and you can put them in a shopping cart, and they can just sit on the ground while you're waiting for things. But a lot of times people do have those covers to keep people from touching the baby, keep lights away and everything, and you really can't monitor the baby, and if the baby ends up at the wrong angle, it can restrict that airway. And that's what I love about baby wearing is once you kind of get it down and you get comfortable with it, it's a great option to do in public, an alternative to maybe those an infant car seat,
Yeah.
because you can constantly monitor baby, and then it kind of keeps people from wanting to come up and touch your baby and get close because they have to get
Yeah.
into your personal space to do that. And so you can monitor baby, you can monitor baby's temperature, help them regulate all of that, and you kind of keep this bubble around your baby because a stranger isn't going to get probably within your arm's reach. But there's something about that baby in the stroller where people just want to lean over and touch it, baby, and say hi. So I
Yep.
think it's a great way to monitor baby in public, and maybe a little safer than just leaving baby in an infant car seat for sometimes hours at a
Yeah.
time.
Well, and it's not recommended actually for babies to sleep in the car seat that is not in the car, just because the angle can be different. You know how like on the car seat of the carriers there's always the what is that called? Like the blue little
Yeah,
ball.
the leveler.
Thank you. I yes, having a leveler. So if you're out of that and the car seat is tipped forward a little bit, that's going to get baby's chin to chest. So it's the same thing like that we're talking about here for baby safety. You don't want baby's chin to chest. That just can compromise their airway. So
Yeah, yeah, and we're on a little bit of a tangent here, but
yeah.
there's been, people are surprised to hear babies have died sleeping in car seats.
Hmm.
And you think, well, they're right next to me, they're right here, but because we're so prone to use those covers and things like that, things can happen. And they're sleeping, they look calm and peaceful. If you're wearing a baby, you're feeling that baby move when they breathe. You can
Yep.
feel if that baby's getting sweaty. All the things that put a baby at higher risk of something like that. So yeah, I love carriers for that reason. But just like we were talking about kind of mastering breastfeeding and baby wearing separately, maybe master baby wearing at home before you try and do it in public. Because say you put on a wrap incorrectly or any carrier incorrectly and they're sagging or they're not comfortable, that's just going to make you less comfortable and more in a hurry.
Hmm. For sure. Yeah.
Okay, so we touched on the safety, why we want them close enough to kiss, having the baby carrier tight, and things like that. What about that M
Invisible.
shape
Yeah.
and visible? Yep.
Hmm. Oh yeah,
What about
M
that
shape.
M shape? Yeah.
So, what you are doing is you are helping babies' hips to be protected. So, babies, they have to make a pretty interesting entrance into the world, and they also have like their hips are not completely developed. So you want to make sure that baby's hips are in that M-shaped position, and that's going to actually help them develop correctly. There's a lot of research out there about hip dysplasia, and that is when the socket of the femur is kind of loose within the pelvis. And that this is something that doctors routinely check with your infant. If they hear that click, then that gives them kind of an idea. It's not painful for a baby at this age, but if we leave it in without be having a treatment, then it can actually uh in their adults, like in their 30s, they can have some arthritis in the hips, and then when they're older, needing a hip replacement. So you're thinking long term here when you're thinking about that. There's a lot of new research out there that I'm really excited about, that hasn't, like, there's still in the process of that. I think we'll start to see a little bit more about if it's because there's kind of like a consensus right now that if you have hip dysplasia, then then that's you have hip dysplasia. Wearing a carrier is not going to give your child hip dysplasia. I do recommend having that hip in that M-shaped position. There are carriers out there that are not in that M-shaped position. I think they do have their purposes and their places. They're a lot of times they're cheaper, or people will get them as hand-me-downs. And if you are in a bind and you're like, that's the only carrier you have, I feel like having Babywearing as opposed to no Babywearing, definitely that makes a big difference. If you do have like one where you're unable to go from hip to hip, you can always add like a scarf around your waist, and that scarf can act as that support from knee to knee. So that's something if somebody's ever in need and they're like, this is the carrier that was given to me, I don't have money for something else, which is fine. I mean, babies are expensive, like inflation right now, like you got to do what you got to do. So I don't want parents to feel like, oh, this is what I have. I can't, I'm hurting my baby or anything like that. Um, but for comfort for baby, and I would definitely do that M-shaped position. Because I personally don't think it would be very comfortable to sit in a sling. I mean, I've done a lot of rock climbing and stuff and kind of have had to sit in a sling for, bits. And when you are just hanging there, it's kind of uncomfortable. So,
Yeah. Yeah, and
yeah.
I'll link in the show notes a
Cool.
link to the Institute of Hip Dysplasia, um, because they have a whole list of all the carriers and brands that they believe are safe.
Yeah.
So if you're wondering if a carrier you have is considered um, hip safe, you can go down and check in that link. Um, but yeah, that's a really great resource, and that's great to know about that M shape because a lot of people haven't heard of it. Um, and there's more and more research coming out that hip dysplasia is probably more common than we know because it doesn't cause pain when we're young, but we start to see those issues um, in adulthood. So
Yep.
all right, guys. Well, that's it for this week's podcast. If you're interested in hearing the second half of our conversation for part 2, where we discuss myths of baby wearing and get into the nitty gritty of benefits of baby wearing for mom and baby, and really the whole family, come back next week and you can check out the rest of the conversation. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next week.